What if a top cabinet official couldn't explain the one right that stops the government from locking you up forever? That's not a hypothetical. It happened in a Senate hearing, and what followed should worry every American who thinks freedom is automatic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Madam Secretary. Secretary Noem, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff recently said that the Trump administration is actively looking at suspending habeas corpus. Last week, you were asked about this, and I want to clarify your position because it's obviously really important to get this right. So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President Lincoln used it.
Excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea. As a senator from the Live Free or Die state, this matters a lot to me and my constituents and to all Americans. So, Secretary Noem, do you support the core protection that habeas corpus provides, that the government must provide a public reason in order to detain and imprison someone?
Yeah, I support habeas corpus. I also recognize that the President of the United States has the authority under the Constitution to decide if it should be suspended or not.
It has never
Let us be clear, though,
it has never been done. It has never been done without approval of Congress. Even Abraham Lincoln got retroactive approval from Congress. So I have been asking executive branch nominees a simple question over the past few months. If the president orders them to break the law, I've been asking, will you follow the law or follow the order? I want to ask you a more specific question here. If the president tries to suspend habeas corpus and a federal court reverses the president's order, will you comply with the court order and uphold habeas corpus, or will you follow the president's directive?
We are following all federal court orders and are complying with that, as is the president, and every decision that I make as well.
That is obviously not true for anybody who reads the news. There are federal court orders right now, including returning somebody who was deported mistakenly. But to be clear, this is about a fundamental legal right that ensures that we live in a free society instead of a police state that would have a sham legal system like Russia or North Korea. So I'm glad that you have now committed to following court orders. I'm glad you believe in the basic freedom for Americans if ordered to do so by a court. And again, I want just to make clear that it is critically important that even if the president tries to suspend the right of people to know why they've been detained or imprisoned, if a federal court reverses that order, that you will follow that order. And I hope all the members of the administration will, because it's obviously critical that some of the people, for instance, who've been deported by mistake, who didn't get due process, be returned in compliance with court orders. So now, let's move on to another issue. International criminal organizations target Americans with sophisticated cyber crime, including elaborate scams that robbed Americans of billions of dollars, with seniors in the United States losing $5 billion to scammers in 2024 alone. As artificial intelligence improves, so does the ability of criminals to deceive and defraud Americans. With this new technology, criminals can impersonate loved ones, develop advanced malware, or make more convincing phishing messages. How is DHS working to identify trends in illegal activity and ensure that new AI systems have safeguards in place to prevent their use in criminal activity?
Yes, we are working extensively through CISA, but in all of our agencies to make sure that we're going after these criminal, nefarious actors. I would say partnering with private industry is critically important so that we have the insight that we need to really understand the tactics that they use and the advancements in software. The AI ability that they have to adjust and to supersede some of our systems is incredible. And so investing in those systems is important, but also having the knowledge and bringing everybody to the table and breaking down the silos between our agencies and our intelligence agencies is important, so we all have the information that we need to get.
Well, and that gets me to one final point and question here, because Senator Peters began to ask about it. There's been recent reporting that indicates that the Chinese government installed remote access to Chinese-made power inverters in the U.S., raising concerns that the Chinese government could try to disable parts of our power grid. And you made a comment following up on Senator Peters' question about the importance of not only working with private industry on this issue, as you would also want to work on AI, but also on working with state and local governments on cybersecurity. And can you just talk to me a little bit about how DHS is partnering with state and local governments right now on cyber?
Well, that's one of the core critical missions of CISA, is to help those state and local governments harden their systems. We're extremely vulnerable by our weakest link. And so when you have a small state that doesn't have the resources it needs to invest in these security operations, then they're vulnerable to attacks and hacking attempts, and they can access our systems. If they have a contract or a system that interfaces with a federal system, it makes us vulnerable as well. So we are responsible for 10 of the 16 critical infrastructures under the Department of Homeland Security, and making sure that China can't come in and shut down our electrical grid, our water systems, things that people rely on every day for their day-to-day lives is very important. So that's why we need these kind of partnerships, is to make sure that we're secure all the way down to our smallest actor that participates.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate working more with you on that. Thank you.
When Senator Maggie Hassan asked Kristi Noem to define habeas corpus, she wasn't quizzing her for sport. She was responding to a very real and very public statement from within the White House suggesting that suspending habeas corpus was being actively considered. That alone should stop anyone in their tracks, because habeas corpus is not a policy lever. It's not an executive tool. It's the legal spine of a free society. At its core, habeas corpus is the government being forced to answer a single, dangerous question. By what authority are you holding this person? That's it. That's the entire idea. And that simplicity is exactly why it's so powerful. It prevents secret prisons. It prevents indefinite detention. It prevents a government from locking someone away and daring the public to figure out why later. When Secretary Noem initially described habeas corpus as something the president can use to remove people and suspend their rights, it revealed something far more alarming than a slip of the tongue. That explanation flipped the meaning entirely on its head. Habeas corpus does not grant power to the government, it restrains it. It exists precisely because governments, historically, cannot be trusted with unchecked authority over people's bodies and freedom. This is not theoretical. The reason habeas corpus exists is because societies learned, painfully, what happens without it. Kings jailed rivals, regimes erased dissidents, people disappeared without charges, trials, or records. Habeas corpus emerged as the legal demand that said, no, if you're going to take someone's freedom, you must explain yourself publicly under law. That's why Senator Hassan stepped in immediately, not angrily, not theatrically, but firmly. Because once you allow that concept to be distorted, you open the door to something much darker than a policy disagreement. You open the door to a system where detention becomes an act of power instead of an act of law. And when Hassan compared societies without habeas corpus to places like North Korea and authoritarian regimes, that wasn't hyperbole. In those systems, detention is not about justice, it's about control. Courts exist only on paper, rights exist only until power finds them inconvenient. The next part of the exchange is where this stops being about legal definitions and becomes about loyalty. Hassan's question wasn't really, do you support habeas corpus? It was, who are you loyal to when the law and the president collide? That question cuts to the heart of constitutional government. The U.S. system is designed so that no single person, not even the president, is above the law. Courts exist to say no. Congress exists to set boundaries. And executive officials swear oaths not to a person, but to the Constitution itself. History makes this painfully clear. Even Abraham Lincoln, in the middle of a civil war, understood that suspending habeas corpus without congressional approval crossed a line. He sought retroactive permission because he knew legitimacy matters, even in emergencies. Power without accountability always justifies itself as temporary. It rarely is. So when Hassan asked whether Noem would obey a federal court order if the president defied it, she was forcing clarity where ambiguity is dangerous. Because the erosion of rights doesn't start with tanks in the streets. It starts with officials saying, "We're complying," while quietly redefining what compliance means. The mention of people deported by mistake is not incidental. Those are real human beings whose lives were upended without proper process. Due process isn't a technicality, it's the difference between a lawful government and an arbitrary one. Once mistakes are ignored instead of corrected, the system stops being about justice and starts being about efficiency and control. What makes this moment resonate is not that Hassan won an exchange, it's that she slowed the conversation down long enough to remind everyone watching that freedom depends on boring procedural things. Court orders, legal definitions, public explanations. These aren't obstacles to governance. They are the guardrails that keep power from becoming abuse. And this is where the viewer should lean in, because the lesson isn't about Kristi Noem alone. It's about how fragile constitutional knowledge has become, even at the highest levels. A society cannot defend rights it no longer understands. If people in power misunderstand them, and people watching don't recognize the danger, those rights quietly weaken. Habeas corpus doesn't disappear with an announcement. It disappears when people stop insisting on it, when exceptions pile up, when emergencies become permanent, when loyalty to authority replaces loyalty to law. That's why moments like this matter, not because they're dramatic, but because they reveal how close the system can drift to the edge without most people noticing. If you value living in a society where the government has to explain itself, where courts matter, and where power has limits, then this isn't just a clip to watch and forget. It's a reminder of why civic knowledge isn't optional. If this breakdown helped you understand what was really at stake here, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and share it with someone who thinks constitutional rights are automatic. They're not. They only exist if people are willing to defend them.